Hello, and welcome to the Shipper Update. I'm Anthony Smith, lead economist here, with the timely and ever-present Michael Vincent.
I'm everywhere, my friend.
He's everywhere and always working. Much appreciated. One of the things that we just got out, Michael Vincent, was housing starts. So
yeah,
I can't go too long without talking about it. You know, it's just
you
my
love
mind
your housing starts.
is fixated upon it.
It's flatbed and housing starts.
Flatbed, housing starts, manufacturing. Can't get enough of it.
It's like
sprinkle a little bit of
McDonald's
retail in
French
there. That's it. And so the housing starts data just came out from the U.S. Census Bureau at 8:30 a.m. this morning. We have right here is the latest housing starts data through March. And so we can look at what's been happening and we can talk to some of the changes that's just happened within housing starts overall. In the green line, we have, of course, our flatbed outbound tender rejection index.
Of course, you don't leave home without it.
I can't. And so what we saw was a dip down in that green line and that flatbed capacity. A little bit loosening happening right now. In that blue line, we have, of course, our overall housing starts for the U.S. And we saw an uptick, a pretty significant spike in the last month of data. So we saw a downward movement in the blue line in the latest month of data that just came out just this morning, less than an hour ago. And I think we were talking about housing starts last week.
You and I were definitely talking about
it last week.
How FOTRI can actually predict it.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so, lo and behold, what do we see? Some downward movement in that housing starts number in that blue line. And if we look at the next chart, we can kind of go through some of the variances.
So FOTRI is flatbed outbound tender rejections, or it's when it's going up, there's so much demand for it because of construction, manufacturing, et cetera, that there's not enough to haul it.
Exactly right.
So it's coming down, meaning it's loosening, there's less production. Gotcha.
Exactly right. And so one of the things that Craig Fuller always talks about is we can't just have the data behind it. We have to have that tribal knowledge, and that's where people like you and me that have been within an industry kind of come in, look at what's going on behind the numbers. And so within housing starts, we have, of course, the West region and the Northeast region. So two regions that were relatively hot before the pandemic, but cooling off. And so Northeast is going to be a little bit more active for multifamily starts. Not going to be a large market. West Coast was one of the larger markets. It's been coming down as of late, of course, with the great exodus that's happening within California. A lot of people leaving the West Coast. That's not too much. That's not expected to change anytime soon.
It's really not. Is it experiencing the same thing in the Northeast as well? An
Northeast it's not as much of an exodus, but there has been some tempering and overall activity. Not as much as the West Coast, though.
Where are they all going? Because here, a house went up for sale Friday in my neighborhood. But there were people touring it the entire day. It was nonstop. It went to auction by 5 o'clock that night.
Right. So our next chart, we're going to see where everyone's going, and that's going to be these two hot regions, and that's going to be the South region and, of course, the Midwest region. So we're here in the great state of Tennessee.
Yes, we are.
South region. So that's going to be one of the areas that a lot of people are going to be moving to and transitioning from the pricier West Coast or some of the more mature markets within the Northeast. And so we're seeing that these two areas being really hot areas. What we saw in the latest housing starts data, of course, some downward movement throughout all the regions. But when we look at what's going on, it's not because of a lack of demand, but of course, Michael Vincent, as you know, there's a lack of supply.
There's no supply of houses.
There's no supply of houses. Lumber, a commodity that we've been watching very closely, is very hard to get a hold of right now and really slowing down production.
It'll cost you a few Dogecoin.
Exactly. It'll cost a few Dogecoin for sure.
For sure.
I'm sure Dooner might be able to get a couple of houses now.
Maybe. He's doing well.
As the captain of Dogecoin Enterprises. But when we're looking across the board, we are still seeing that there is going to be activity in most regions. I think one of the things you just mentioned with Andrew Cox is that year-over-year comps are just absolutely wonky right now. Same thing with housing starts. When we look at year-over-year, even though we have like subtle downward movements on a month-to-month basis, still year-over-year, we're seeing movements in the hundreds of percentage points in a comparison. So it's going to be some time before some of that levels out and makes a little bit of sense.
Now, we talked about how it becomes self-limiting, right? Are we seeing any of that?
So when we're looking at with housing starts, some of the limitations, of course, are going to be inventory and the.
But I mean, it's still though. A house goes up for sale that morning. It's already a bidding war by 5 o'clock. It's like I could just put my house on the market and say, start the bidding here.
And that's one of the other things. So when we're looking at new home sales versus existing home sales are going to take up a much larger portion of that transactionary period. So we're looking at existing home sales. That's going to be well over 80%, into the 90% range of overall housing transactions. And that lack of inventory for existing homes, as you mentioned, rapid movement off the market and putting a lot of upward pressure on those new home sales, because if you're looking at a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, 2-bath existing home, it's usually going to be a little bit more more price friendly for the existing home compared to the new build.
Oh yeah,
but
it's not new lumber.
Yeah, it's not going to need
lumber.
And
you can't find a contractor.
You can't. And so all those things are really pushing upward pressure. But we have to always relate it back to freight. It doesn't just end with those flatbeds moving those building materials. Right. Also has those downstream impacts. So some of the things that Andrew's talking about, those retail sales, especially for furniture.
And that goes into the durable goods, does it?
Exactly.
Not? Yeah.
Exactly. And so we're looking at furniture, looking at appliances. You buy a new house, you want a new furniture set. So all has those downstream effects.
Yeah, it absolutely does. So as that stays hot, this stays hot, right? Exactly. And as long as that's going there, it's kind of mitigating that switch from goods to services, I suppose. Exactly. The other thing that I think is probably mitigating that a little bit is international travel isn't as loose as we'd like it to be right now, right? So, I mean, many of the vacations are outside there. Once that also maybe changed that a little bit.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Excellent stuff. Thank you so much, Anthony. Very insightful, and we'll catch up with you again.